You're listening to Chicago Stories, a podcast from City Hall featuring the stories of everyday Chicagoans, as told to Mayor Emanuel.
Mayor Emanuel, Chicago Stories. We are honored to have George Saunders here, who's award-winning, Man Booker Prize winner, Lincoln in the Bardo. If you haven't read it, and I have, I really do recommend it. And I'm so honored you're also a Chicagoan.
Yes, I am.
So welcome home.
Thank you for having me. What an honor.
And you said that you're the second American.
Second in a row, actually. Yeah. Paul Beatty won the year before. Yeah. And then Marlon James, who lives here now, won the year before that. So.
I knew that. I was just testing you. I was waiting you to say that. Congratulations.
Thanks.
Yeah, but did you notice that your win is the only one that got the Brits a little on edge?
I think as they pile up, they're going to be increasingly irritated.
Yeah, this is not the way the little pond was supposed to work. Yeah. It was supposed to be a one-way, not the other way, from a cultural standpoint.
Yeah. I always say I was really happy that American won this year, and after that, I could be more neutral about it.
That's what Mom Saunders said.
Yeah.
This was the year American had to win.
That's right.
So congratulations. Yeah. You know, I do want to get to this, but I want to get to something else first, if I could. So in doing my homework assignment, in my attempt to get an A in your class, went back and researched your commencement address at Syracuse. And I thought it was fascinating that you talked about this one example with a young girl that was a neighbor that grew up, went to school, moved out, but about kindness. And what caught me was kindness is not the opposite of meanness.
No.
And if you could explain to the listening public what it was you were trying to, why did you pick that topic? It's an interesting topic for commencement. I usually try to do issues like you're going to learn the most from failure, not from success. Yeah. But why kindness?
Well, you know, I had done a speech like that for my daughter's middle school class a few years earlier, and it went well.
So you road tested out of middle school before college?
I did, and it was a big hit. So then about 3 days before the Syracuse one, I thought I'll just dust that out, and then I couldn't find it. My organizational skills being what they are. So I kind of wrote it from memory. And the gist of it is, you know, at this age, I don't really regret much. You know, like I've been in, a hockey game where I scored on my own goalie and then threw my stick in rage and fell over. I don't actually regret that. It's a good story. But the one thing I thought I could tell the kids was when you get this age, you will have a handful of regrets. They won't have to do with achievement, money, none of that stuff, power. They'll have to do with those handful of moments when you know you could have done more to ease somebody else's burden. And for whatever reason, in my case, it's usually a kind of social anxiety. You don't do it. And those pile up in a strange way, you know. So I use kind of all the things I've done that were unkind, I used the lightest example. But it was true, that little girl has been in my mind all these years, you know. And it wasn't like I was mean to her. I just wasn't extraordinary, you know.
Did you ever try to find her?
No, I know her name, but and you know, for all I know, to her, maybe it was just one in a string of difficult, you know, times. So I never have.
It's an interesting. I was obviously others were too, but I was taken by that was the topic of a commencement address. You know, especially as young men and women embark on their next chapter of their life.
Yeah, it took a little bit of guts because it seems like a light subject. It seems almost kind of new age, and it's. But what I found out in writing it, and then in the it came out in book form. Years later, you find out that Americans tend to mistake kindness for niceness, and they're not the same things. So
how do you distinguish and draw the difference between niceness and kindness?
Niceness is a default where you never raise your voice, you never push back. Somebody drives a spike through your head, and you say, "Oh, thanks for the coat rack." You know, it's kind of that kind of progressive thing. But I think kindness would be, if you could, you would do whatever you could in every moment to maximize the benefit of the people around you. In other words, you try to help them realize every positive wish that they had. And that's a different thing. You know?
I thought what was interesting is the way you described it, as I'm doing this by memory from yesterday. As again, I was saying, we're doing this interview on the day I'm working on gun legislation down in Springfield, but is the person that's a recipient of that would know that you've done something out of the ordinary, almost to comfort them, and that there's something of the human spark that makes it special.
Yes.
It's different. It's not just...
Right, and they might not know.
How are you? It's more than that.
Right.
It's more than checking the box.
Yeah, and I use the example of if you go into a coffee shop and the young person is crying or has just been crying, niceness goes, "Oh, what's the matter? Can I help?" Kindness
in that tone too.
Yeah, always that tone. But kindness might decide to not say anything. Maybe that's not what's what's needed. So I think it takes a little more awareness, certainly more than I have, but the idea that to be kind, you might even have to be forceful. If a baby's about to put her finger on a light switch, you don't say, "Sweetie, let me explain to about Faraday's concept of," you grab the baby and,
George, let me ask you, so your first novel, you're batting 1,000 because this is your first novel. You win the Booker-wise. I would just go back to short stories. You did it.
Yeah, I may just go back to working in a restaurant.
What made you decide to leave the short story format that you were, like I think it's 10th of December?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What made you decide to leave that format, try a novel, and did you have any expectation that this was going to be, because of topic or whatever, award-winning?
It really was just, I heard this story about Lincoln 25 years ago, and it just stuck with me all that time.
The story about him going into
his son's crypt. He was so grief-stricken. And it just didn't seem like something I could do. I tend to be a little bit of a, South Side funny, a little sci-fi, a little fast talker. That's my thing. So I couldn't see any intersection between what I did and what the book would require. And then about 4 years ago, I'm in my 50s, and I'm like, I've been wanting to write this book for 20 years. Why am I not?
This very book?
Yeah, or a book around this incident.
Yeah.
And I thought, man, the reason I'm not doing it is because I'm scared. I'm afraid I will fall flat. I won't have the emotional resources to do it. My talent is too small. So then you're like, well, those aren't very good reasons to avoid a book. Those are good reasons to try it. So I gave myself kind of a 6-month contract, just don't tell anybody you're working on it. Try it, and at the end of 6 months, just really frankly see if it's going anywhere. And by then it was. So, but throughout, I kept saying to it, don't bloat. I don't want you to be a novel if you want to be a story. I don't want you to be a story if you don't.
Do you talk to your story that way? Like
Yeah,
you're
I
doing?
actually do it.
You do?
Yeah, and to myself. I think part of the artistic process for me, and it might be true in all things, there's the talent, and then there's the talent for having that particular talent. So a lot of it is sort of self-gaming. You're trying to, this outer person trying to almost manipulate in a positive way the talent so it'll do what it needs to do. So in that case, I knew that if I said to everyone, I'm writing a novel, it would fail. But if I said, this is a secret thing, we don't know what it is, don't know what form it's going to take, and if it shrinks, if it goes away, that's perfectly fine. Then that sort of inner talent felt happy. And
it is so clear that you meant that because you're using the plural we, and there's only you sitting across from me. So it really was two of you, you and this other voice.
Or sometimes three.
That bubble right above you.
Absolutely. No, it's true.
So you should probably explain to people, all the reviews do, but Bardo is this kind of middle world between here and the hereafter.
Right. In general, it means transitional space. So that could be, we're in it now. We're in the Bardo between birth and death. This book is between the moment of your death and whatever it is that comes next. So it's like purgatory, but for me as a Southside Catholic, purgatory is kind of like the DMV.
So can I ask you a question? You converted though. Do I have that right or wrong?
Yeah, I kind of am both. I think I'm a Catholic who's a Buddhist, basically.
Could you have written this without that conversion? Or did you need that to appreciate the spirituality around that middle ground?
That's a great question. My wife and I have done a lot of Buddhist practice, so I absorbed some of that. The main thing was that in my internalized idea of purgatory, there's not a lot of negotiation. You die and you go there and there's no talking. As my understanding of the Tibetan Bardo is that it's a little more negotiable. In other words, if you realize that these hallucinations you're having, heaven or hell, are being manufactured by your mind, you can actually intercept them and transform them. In this particular Bardo that I made in the book, the big problem is they don't realize they're dead, and so they're kind of locked up in this state of denial. So from a novelist point of view, it's more fruitful to use the Bardo because things can change. People can get themselves out of hot water in the Bardo, whereas in purgatory, I think you just wait.
What made you, so you have this moment, you have obviously you read about in research that Lincoln would go there with this anguish, and I'm always fascinated by his own ability to overcome his own depression or mental status based on both the death of the first woman he loved, the death of his son, the death around him as he's trying to hold on to America, literally. And it really does try him emotionally and psychologically as somebody's. So of the characters that are in that space, I wouldn't call them ghosts, but I'm going to say ghosts for lack of a, what do you think what were you trying to say that they represented?
Well, to me, they were...
Or what were their voices? I mean, and what do you think this book says about America right now?
Yeah. For me, the sort of admission ticket for these ghosts was they had to have died dissatisfied, deeply dissatisfied, enough that they, like a dog going through a doorway, they kind of halted. So the ticket was, if you were a happy, well-adjusted, well-loved person, you're not in the book because you already went on to whatever your fate was. And then Lincoln, to me, he appeared as a guy who had just been bottomed out by loss. It's those times in your life when everything is going so wrong that you can't even keep up the pretense of being in control. I feel that he was in that for a lot of those 5 years. And it made him extraordinarily wise and extraordinarily selfless. Because when you get bottomed out like that, your ego is laughing at you. So I think you have maybe a more pure relation to truth. When you're trying to protect your self-image, you have a lot of denial mechanisms that keep data from getting in. But you feel in those last few years that Lincoln just had none of that. And he knew there was so much at stake. So he became this kind of, in Buddhism, they'd call him a bodhisattva. His whole thing, and speaking of kindness, his whole thing was, let's fix this. Let's get through this and try to minimize the suffering.
I think it's fascinating that both your book, the book about the underground,
Whitehead.
Right, yeah. Whitehead's book, On the Run. It's interesting that both of those at this time captured the public's literary imagination, and I think actually beyond literary. Why do you think that is?
My experience with this book was I started it and finished it before the Trump thing began. Okay. But I think there was something in the air. And now what I think is we have some national goiters. Goiters that we never fixed, And when you read the study of the Civil War, you see that these things never got resolved. They just got pushed down the line. So I think that Colson and I both had, I would say, some kind of pre-sentiment, which when you're working with your subconscious, it's weird how that stuff sometimes
waits.
It comes up way before you consciously know it. So and then when I took this book on the road, it was amazing how ripe people are to talk politics and righteousness.
It's interesting. So I call her my baby, but she's a senior in high school, and she's reading The Plot Against America by Philip Roth, and I reread it. It's amazing to me that 10 years ago he wrote that book, and he saw so fast around the corner of what was coming.
There's something about when you're a fiction writer, your whole currency is detail, the specific, and you don't have to know what it means. You just have to not miss it. When you work in that realm for many hours, the world tells you a truth that even you, the guy, can't pick up, which is really fascinating.
How do you think, I know you find it shocking, but I want to talk about Chicago and George Saunders. So tell me, A, you've been away, what you miss most, and B, what do you think how did Chicago prepare you to as a writer? And the specific book, if any?
It's the same answer, which is and I don't know if it was our neighborhood or our family.
So what neighborhood you grew up in?
Well, we were at 55th in California, which is Gage Park.
Right.
And then we moved out to Oak Forest, which is a south suburb. But there's something about the Chicago, I mean, already, we don't know each other, and we're kind of just talking, frankly. That kind of thing where humor is close to the surface, frankness is never a bad thing, which I associated with the South Side, but maybe it's just a Chicago, like a Royco thing, kind of don't be pretentious. If we put our heads together and make some jokes, we'll get to the truth faster, Right. And that was something, it took me a long time to bring that into my work, because when I first started, I had a little bit of maybe I was an engineer, and I was anxious about all my Ivy League colleagues, and I was stiff, and then suddenly when I was about 30, I realized that you can't keep the Chicago out of your work. That's who you are. So then the stories got faster, they got funnier, they got a little more irreverent, This one, the only thing I can think is that the Catholic Church is in that book in a big way, in the sense that we should worry about what happens afterwards, and what happens afterwards should inform every minute that we're in here.
I just want you to know you're talking to somebody that represents the Jewish wing of the Catholic Church. I'm big for the Pope.
I have a theory that they're the same, actually.
Nobody's allowed to attack my Pope anymore, okay?
And we have the guilt.
Yeah. Well, you guys get over it every Sunday. We carry it for 55,000 years, okay? So don't get it's not the same. Try wearing this thing for 5,800 years. It's really tough.
Yeah.
So, but do you miss Chicago?
I do. I sometimes, I left here when I was 18 to go to college, and I lived here briefly then in the 80s, but I often wondered if I'd stayed, my whole life. I think I would have an unbelievable novel, just because the city, especially when you grow up here, remember that phrase Chicagoland, that was, and a place from the inside, it emotionally in all these different ages. So it's a regret of mine that I left, actually.
I didn't know this when I read the book. And if it's too raw, you just tell me I don't want to talk about it, okay? But there was at one point you were on financial thin ice.
Oh, yeah.
And meaning you were every day fighting to just keep your head right above the water line.
Sure.
How does that inform you as an artist in where you look today, you're a guy who was once not just at poverty, but kind of getting your head underwater. Now you're the winner, the second American to win the Booker Prize for his first novel.
Yeah. I tell my students...
If you had a Jewish mother, she would say you could do better. Okay,
it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah. It's adequate.
Don't gloat.
But your brother's done now.
It's a novel he's ready. You don't believe it.
You should see what Bobby's doing.
You know, what happened, I teach at Syracuse, and we get 650 applications for 6 spots. So these are the best young writers in America. What we find is, you know, they're already great. They already can imitate anybody. But the job is, can we push them into that realm where they're writing about the stuff only they can write about? So for me, what happened was, my wife and I were married. We had 2 kids, no money, always scrambling. And I noticed that none of that was getting into my writing. You know, my writing was all trout fishing in Spain or whatever. You know, and that was a big moment when you realize that if something is occupying you 100% of your time, which for me, money has occupied me 100% of my time up until recently, basically, then that ought to get in your work somehow. And if you leave it out, you're falsifying. And conversely, if you can find a way to get it in, that's when you do that thing called finding your voice. You know, so for me, I was working in Rochester as a tech writer,
right.
And it was all money all the time. And I thought, well, yeah, that's got to find a way to get into the story. So suddenly the characters were having actual financial problems, and they were being detailed in the stories, and it kind of came alive in a weird way.
So my one thing when I read about that moment in time, I don't know how long it lasted for you, the financial kind of stress.
I mean, it wasn't like the Gulag, you know, but it was, but yeah, 5 years.
Is there anybody that you, looking back, who was extraordinarily kind to you in that moment, and you wish you had said something to? Because I thought about your commencement address about being kind to somebody else in pain. And here's a moment, 5 years, I don't remember how long it was, but it's 5 years, that you're in pain. Was there somebody that
so many people.
Really?
So many, every day. You know, people that have coworkers and...
So what would be the one, I don't want to say one person, but an act of kindness that you remember?
Well, I mean, this is maybe the way it plays out in an actual, you know, corporation. I had a woman who was a level ahead of me, and she kept me employed. We had to bill our hours, so she would always put up a little tent around me and make sure I had enough time to do my work. If she had a new project, she'd get me in. And she knew I was writing at work, so we had a kind of an unspoken agreement that she would give me a little grant for the arts, and then in turn I would never let her down, and I would, you know. So it was a little bit of a you know, kind of a nice professional form of kindness that I appreciate.
That's great.
Yeah.
Did you ever tell her thank you?
I have, yeah.
So do you want to write another novel, or are you going to go back to short story format?
I'd love to write another one, but what I learned in the past was if I intend to write a novel, I won't.
You won't write it.
Yeah. So I have to kind of, what I find is I have to take my eyes
off.
off.
So I shouldn't talk about the film?
No, you know, you can that's okay. But if I think about, you know, intending to write a book, I'll mess it up. So although the other day I was sleeping, and I had this anxiety about what's the next book, and so I dreamed the title of the next book, and it's great. It's like, and then the rest of the night
Are we allowed to know, or
I'm dreaming scenes from this book. So I wrote
the second night.
Yeah. No, same night, long night of scenes, unscrolling. So I just wrote, I said, I don't need to write any of this down except the title. That'll do it. So I write it down. Get up the next morning, it's Custer in Purgatory. I'm like, no, you can't. So that was a washout.
It is. I hate when you wake up and say, during your sleep in that, think about that Bardo between awake and asleep, and you go, I'll never forget this. I got to remember this. And then you wake up, what was it I was doing? Then there'll be 2 weeks later.
Yes. Where the mind makes perfectly good sense out of insanity. You know, there's a big party with talking hippopotamuses, and it all makes perfect sense. And you wake up, and it's like that. I was insane.
Did you do research on Lincoln? So who do you like reading about? Since I think of myself as, and he's right behind you, looking at you while you're talking. I just want you to know. Yeah.
I found 2 books that were amazing. One was by John Sotos, and it's called The Physical Lincoln, and it's just a big book of every physical description of every part of Lincoln's body that was ever made. And the book is written kind of to promote a certain diagnosis of Lincoln. He has a certain condition that, you know. And then the other one was called The Unpopular Mr. Lincoln, and it's just a list of every snotty thing anyone ever said about him, and it's unbelievable. I mean, you can see that this
the baboon and all that,
everything, and you can see that trolling is not a new invention, you know. And so to imagine that he was hearing and reading all those things, even as he was doing the things we admire him for, kind of doubles your respect for him.
There's a great space in the Lincoln Museum down in Springfield where you walk into a space and there's pictures of people. It's not a glass wall, but there are pictures come at you where they're screaming something at Lincoln. And you're standing there, as best as I can present it, you're in Lincoln's shoes, so to say, and all the people and headlines and everything that is self-doubt, that would create this immense amount of self-doubt.
Wow.
And it requires, obviously, some inner strength. And it's weird because it requires an immense amount of inner strength to persevere from a guy who's rife with self-doubt.
Yeah.
That's what always fascinates me from a psychological about Lincoln.
Yeah, because he must have gotten down to a place where there was nothing.
Raw.
Yeah, raw. I heard somebody once told me that when you get criticism, the correct thing to do is they modeled it by actually turning their body, opening their chest, let it hit you. Don't flinch, don't defend, let it hit you, and then walk away. And in a few days, there'll be little bits of criticism that stick. And those are the ones that you already knew about and that you believe in. But this person said if you flinch, you're missing out on the possibility of getting some gold.
It sounds a little more Buddhist than I can
accept.
Well,
easier said than done. Yeah, when a bad review comes in.
Let me. I'm fascinated as a former dancer. I'm always fascinated with studying the creative process. Do you look for a spark? I mean, how does that? And how do you overcome writer's block, which I have no.
David Foster Wallace said that writer's block is always a case of having artificially heightened standards that you should disregard. So in other words, if you are having writer's block, you're expecting too much. And for me, the antidote is revising a lot. I revise obsessively.
Do you revise while you're writing, or you put it down, come back the next day before you start, you revise?
Usually it's like 3 or 4 sessions a day where I'll write something, read it from the beginning, mark it up, and do that until as long as I'm fresh. But that to me is really interesting because when I was younger, I thought the writer, the artist had to have an intention and then just execute it in this kind of condescending, masterful way. But now the more exciting prospect is I don't know what I'm trying to say. I won't know it until I say it, and even then it'll surprise me. And that's achieved by going through it again and again and kind of trying to keep your concepts low, keeping your judging mind quiet. And then maybe as in dance, you do something 400 times, your body or something bigger than your regular mind finds a path.
It's the language of the body.
I think it is. And so that was a big breakthrough for me was I don't have to be smart right now. I don't have to be funny right now. I have to just be honest about whether I'm being smart or funny, make the changes, and then rinse, lather, repeat for sometimes years, And then slowly the thing takes on a better mind than you have. This book is much smarter than me. It's much more kind than me. It's everything. So the beauty of that is a book is basically the sum total of all the different yous that manifest within that period, which I found really liberating. And it's a great antidote for writer's block because, of course, you give yourself permission to write poorly every day. But over the long haul, the corrections you make are slowly moving it into an area that you would approve of.
So were you surprised at the way this book grabbed the public?
Yes and no. Part of you is very cocky and thinks, "Oh, of course it will." And then when it actually happens, you realize you didn't maybe fully believe that. The thing that I love is that I'm meeting people at readings who really didn't like my other stuff. It was too dark or a little too specialized, and this one is hitting them in a more direct, emotional way.
Do you like being compared to Kurt Vonnegut?
Sure. As long as I come in second, I'm happy.
Are you a middle child?
No, I'm a first child. Yeah. No,
That's such not an older child answer.
But with Vonnegut, you got to.
How many siblings are there?
I have 2 younger sisters.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I'm going to tell my son because he has 2 younger sisters too.
It's okay.
You're okay with being compared to Kurt
Oh
Vonnegut?
yeah, I honor.
Now, when you read material or books? Do you read one at a time? I'm always fascinated with how people. I'm one at a time. My wife reads 5 at a time.
I do. I'm more like your wife, I think.
Really?
And I'm also.
You don't find that frustrating?
No, and if one takes me, then I'll go. But I have them open all over the place, and then often. I'm very bold about just stopping. If something isn't doing it for me, I just stop. And I know some people can't do that. Yeah, I can do it pretty easily.
You can put something down and say, "Forget about it."
Because I'm always reading a little bit. Carnivorously, like I just want to read something that's going to get into my work. So if something isn't, I just kind of go, no offense, but
give me one of the better novels you've read of recent.
Well, I'll tell you a I was reading, actually it's nonfiction, but The Stamp from the Beginning. Have you read that? That's an amazing, it's called A Concise History of Racist Ideas in America. And I just found it mind-blowing. It's kind of an academic study of how we started thinking in racial terms and the consequences and then what that means. And I was reading, I always read Dead Souls. I read by Gogol. I read that about once a year if I can. And I don't know why. It's not the funniest book and it doesn't move me that much, but there's something about it that is, that model could make a great American novel if a person could figure out how to do it. It's a really funny book. It just laceratingly honest about the way people think and talk and trick each other. And it's got also a lot of beautiful descriptions of Russian houses and countryside that I think would be.
Do you find teaching helpful in the writing or getting in the way of the time you need to be
so far helpful, and in fact, I had this year off, and I didn't love it. I like
because
being
of lack
in the
of
classroom.
structure.
Yeah, it's the Catholic. If I have 2 days of solid teaching work,
as your monk, I'm going to tell you, you haven't left your Catholicism far behind.
Not at all. I don't think you ever can.
Yeah.
But if I have 2 solid days of working, then on Friday I feel like, okay, now I can really be, crazy or inventive. And then also the Syracuse students are amazing. So, you kind of inoculate yourself against that old person thing, like, oh, these kids today, they're so talented that you just go, yeah, these kids today are great.
Do you like reading history?
I do. Yeah, I do.
American, specifically?
Especially, and Civil War, for some reason, is really, alive. And that was one of the treats of this book, is you could work for 3 or 4 hours on writing, and then you had 7 of research. And
so, what do you miss most about Chicago? The neighborhood, Gage Bar?
I think the extended context, like being able to drive through a place where you were 15, and then sort of check in with people that not consciously check in, but happen to check in with people that you knew then and see the way life has unfolded. That's a rich thing.
All right, I'm going to test you now about your Chicago roots, brother.
Okay.
Thick or thin pizza?
Thin.
Okay.
Or
That's
double
okay.
crusted.
Oh, wow, okay. 16-inch or 12-inch socks?
16.
Okay. Cubs or Sox?
Socks.
That was quick. You didn't even want to take a breath on that
I
one.
don't want to be assassinated in the street.
Hancock or Sears Tower?
Hancock.
This is new since you left. Lake or river?
I don't even know what that means.
Do you prefer
both?
Both? Well, you have to go see what's happened to the river for the Riverwalk. But lake or river? You don't get to say both.
Lake.
Okay.
You know why? Because of Stuart Dybek's story, We Didn't. Do you know that one?
No.
It's set on the lake, and a young couple is trying to consummate their relationship, and they go out to the lake, and they're alewives, did I pronounce it? Alewives? And they're about to consummate it, and then a police car comes rolling up, and a body has washed up. And so the story is, we didn't.
Here's my theory of now interviewing a number of Chicago writers. We have a thing about characters that nobody else can do, Chicago writers. They can get to, whether it's writing about, like Studs Terkel, about people and their voices, or authors like yourself who come out of Chicago, we can get character like nobody else. And I think it's unique to somebody who has a history or depth to this city.
Well, I think you're right, and at least in my experience, one of the reasons is that character was revered. Like when we would have the family around, a valid topic for a story was this guy at work. You're not gonna, and it's not like he had to have done anything heroic, but even a quirk, or some kind of strange obsession would be enough to make him a character. And so you learn. So Junot Diaz told me once that he thought writers were people who came from environments where early on they got the message that language was power. And I think a lot of those Chicago stories that I heard as a kid were about kind of like
some guy in the neighborhood.
Because simultaneously, like, how weird is this, and also how wonderful is it? And you don't have to choose; it can be weird and wonderful.
Can I ask you what? Did you think about the title ever being Lincoln in Bardo rather than in the Bardo?
I had the thought that actually both Lincolns were in the Bardo, so the son and the father were both in a transitional thing.
I think Mary lived her whole life like that.
Yeah.
Sorry. I hope she doesn't get upset at me for saying that.
Mary gets a bum deal. She was.
You think?
Yeah. I mean, the thing you read, she was apparently very beautiful, very sought after, and he was crazy about her. And what I read in one place that he was actually, although he was weird looking, he was very attractive to women because of the height and the power.
Well, he stood out.
Yeah, and he made a point of deflecting attention from women so he wouldn't aggravate his wife, and good husband.
George Saunders, welcome home, first of all. Lincoln in the Bardo. Really, thank you for making time while you're here in Loyola.
It was such a pleasure.
It's great. Congratulations on winning the award.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
My pleasure.
You're listening to Chicago Stories with Mayor Emanuel. You can subscribe and leave a review on Apple Podcasts and tweet your guest ideas using hashtag ShyStories. Thanks for listening.